Nic Peterson here, and we're going to talk about mastery, the art of learning quickly through practice, the actual acquisition of skills. So this is going to come after some intense deep observation, which we've talked about in the past. Super important step. But moving forward, we want to practice. We want to practice the right way. This is where true masters derive their real pleasure. Okay, it's not just entertainment or distraction. It's a real deep pleasure. It's been called flow, whatever you want to call it. It's that enjoyment, that real fulfillment that comes from the mastery of something. Okay, and this looks different. Practice can look completely different if you are playing the violin or the piano. It's a physical thing, right? But there's also sales and influence. It's a little bit more nebulous. It's a little bit less concrete. So the practice is going to look different. This is like learning a language, right? You still have to speak it and conceptualize things quickly, but it's a little bit different. It's a little bit more abstract than reading music notes, for example, which I have yet to learn how to do. But I've been known to learn languages for fun, and that's one of the reasons why it's the pleasure, which we'll talk about, comes from the mastery process. And understand that without this step, without the step of actually practicing, we are ignorant, right? People don't realize their inadequacies, and they don't realize how hard something really is. This is the armchair quarterback that swears they would have thrown a better pass. Until you've actually tried to throw a pass in an NFL game, you're just ignorant to the actual difficulty and your actual inadequacies. And that's just the way it is. So the practice makes you well aware of your own deficiencies so that you can get better. The whole point of practice is to get on this upward slope. It is called the cycle of accelerated returns. This is where you get better incrementally, right? You just over time, and then there's this compound effect, or what Jeff Olson calls the slide edge, where out of nowhere, it just seems like there's this rapid improvement. Most people never make it to that point, and that's where mastery happens. This is where people get better. The ones that know how to reach the cycle of accelerated returns here are the ones that quickly master things and become top 1%. And the cycle of accelerated returns is simply you increase your skill and practice becomes easier. Once you can catch the football, it's more fun to go play catch, right? And then it becomes more interesting because it's easier. You can start trying to catch with one hand or diving catch or all these other things, right? It just becomes more interesting because you start to understand it. And because it's more interesting, you do longer hours, which increases your skill. And this cycle is where that rapid improvement occurs. So the whole idea is to push through and achieve this cycle of accelerated returns. This is like the opposite of the diminished returns you want to be aware of later on. This is reaching the point of quick improvement. And by the end of this, you will be ahead of everybody else because it's really hard to reach this point. And we'll talk about why, right? So the whole idea is to increase the skill enough to make it easier. And when it's easier, it becomes more interesting. And when it's more interesting, you do it longer. And it just compounds, right? Jeff Olson will say the universe is on a curve. This is what he means. All right, and then there's a few ways to push through there. A few things you need to understand. One is the way we learn when developing a new skill. There is something called a tacit knowledge, and I've talked about it before. It simply means it's a feeling or a skill or an idea we have that we may not be capable of communicating. Right? Learning a language, for example. This is the natural learning process because language is relatively new, right? We used to have to watch, observe, build something, I got to build a tool like that too. And that's how we learn naturally. In today's world, a lot of times we intellectualize first, practice later. But our natural learnings develop this tacit knowledge. The skill of being able to feel something and do something. And maybe you can't communicate it, but you can do it, right? Our brains are highly suited for this kind of learning, which means after you observe, you just got to start playing with a new skill. Okay, this is all skills, even non-physical ones. You have to start trying to speak the language before you really start learning it. Maybe you can read it and conjugate the verbs, but that's useless to you when you go to France and you've never actually spoken or heard French, right? That's a tacit knowledge. You can't really explain how the French speak. It's really, really fast. But until you've actually had a conversation with somebody that speaks French, you don't really understand how they speak. And it is a whole different world than when you read it and take a test on Duolingo, because that's how I learned, right? So that's a tacit knowledge. Understand, developing that first is going to give you the foundation, and you're not fighting an uphill battle. This is the way our brains are hardwired to learn. So downstream, right? 2, understand there's going to be tedium, right? You got tacit knowledge, tedium. Not everything is supposed to be fun and entertaining. Okay, skill development requires work. That's just the way it is. It's a new skill. It requires work. Not everything's supposed to be fun and rewarding. And when you understand that, you are more likely to push through. And we talked a little bit about real pleasure, and we'll kind of understand how real pleasure comes from this. But the best analogy for you to take home is kind of like working out. The greatest masters. Now, I lived with and worked with one of the greatest learners of all time. He's young, Dr. Kashi, but he will definitely be remembered as one of the greatest learners of all time. And what he did is, just like I do in the gym, and you should in the gym, or you're doing cardio or whatever, is you take a perverse pleasure in the pain of boredom, right? This is not, ooh, this sucks, I need to get away from it, right? When you're doing cardio or you're lifting weights, it's, ooh, this sucks. This is good. This is positive. There's something good on the other end of this. And that is the tedium involved with learning a new skill and developing these new neural pathways, right? So that's kind of the key here is, can you develop this perverse pleasure almost in being bored, so to speak? Being not looking for the easy way out or the quick distraction, because that's not pleasurable. And again, we'll talk about where people get their real pleasure from. So there's tedium, right? And that tedium comes from deep work. Cal Newport has a great book, Deep Work. Check it out. You are way, way better off focusing for 2 to 3 hours on a task, a new task, than this diffused attention over 8 hours. We're trying to build neural pathways, right? And these pathways don't get built if our attention is diffused. Okay, so this is essentially something that's going to come next with this unconscious competence. Focus, like when you first learn how to ride a bike or drive a car, right? Everything you are doing is to make sure you don't run somebody over, get in a wreck, airbags aren't popping out and breaking your face open, right? So that requires deep work. You got to think about the gas pedal, the brake pedal, hyper focused, right? At this stage, 2 hours of that super focused is about all you really need, and any more is going to get sloppy, right? Later on, you could drive for 8 hours straight because you're unconsciously competent. You have a competence and you're just not even aware of it, which is really cool as a next step. So understand the importance of deep work, which means one thing. I am working through this one thing, and I am working through the hang-ups, and I'm going to spend 2 to 3 hours today figuring out this one thing with no distractions. Distractions do not allow for the appropriate neural pathways to be developed. So we covered the cycle of accelerated returns, the importance of the cycle of accelerated returns. And if you can get here, you will become a master and learn quicker than anybody else. I promise. Okay. Talked about the tacit knowledge, the kind of knowledge you need to really understand something, but maybe you can't communicate it, and that's okay for now. The tedium involved, right? It's not going to be easy. It's going to require deep work, no distraction. Okay. When you do your deep work, this is 2 to 3 hours. I use the gym example a lot, but it could be piano, it could be a violin, it could be driving a car. You have to focus really, really hard. How does this bicep work? I really got to focus on moving this bicep, or I really got to focus on not running anybody over when I'm driving. And that's the deep work. That's 2 to 3 hours of super focused deep work. During that time, your frontal cortex is doing the work. It's learning something new, right? It has to be fully activated, and that takes up all of your bandwidth. You're not going to be able to take in a whole lot more, and that's okay, because right now we're learning this skill. And later on, once you develop you become what I call unconsciously competent. It means you've developed the pathways and they've been delegated to other parts of the brain. So now I don't have to worry about how do I use my bicep, or how do I not run people over, and how do I use the gas and the brake. Now I can talk on the phone while I drive, or I have a conversation while I'm working out, because the frontal cortex is not active in the skill anymore. Okay, so you'll see when you are learning a skill, your frontal cortex is super active. And once you have learned a skill, if you're just driving, listening to the music, there's no activity at all, which means you have freed up bandwidth to do other things. So we want to work to be unconsciously competent. And that's part of this. It's the easier practice. So now I know how to use my bicep. I can use more weight, right? I can try new exercises. I can do things like that. Now that I can not have to focus on driving so much, just how to drive, I could really focus on navigating the streets, because I have unconscious competence in this skill, which makes it, again, pushes you into this cycle of accelerated returns where you get much, much better, much, much quicker. And you cannot achieve this unconscious competence if you are multitasking all day. We're kind of right back to deep work. If you are swapping domains, if you are trying to learn how to write, and then you got to make a phone call and then get back to writing and make a phone call, you never really become unconsciously competent at the writing part, right? So understand that there's just the domain swapping during this phase of mastery needs to be to a minimum, preferably not at all, right? We're trying to develop unconscious competence. Once you can do it without thinking about it, we really get into this cycle of accelerated returns, but you have to develop the tacit knowledge. You have to go through the tedium. You have to do a ton of this deep work to become unconsciously competent. Pleasure. That's where real pleasure comes from, right? It's not being entertained. That's just entertainment. It's reaching this state of flow, which psychologists like to use. But it's overcoming a challenge and developing self-confidence. The amount of people that I have talked to, whether it be business, nutrition, training, yada, 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 their source of unhappiness is not what they think it is. It's not, hey, I am overweight. It is the self-confidence that comes from being overweight. It's not that my business is failing. It's the self-confidence that they don't have, that if they could figure it out and take care of their family, they would feel that real pleasure. They would feel fulfillment. So pleasure does not come from keeping busy, right? The real fulfillment comes from overcoming these challenges, reaching this accelerated return cycle, and knowing you can figure things out. And the big step to that is accepting these two, the tedium and the deep work, and seeing boredom not as a reason to go do something else, but as a reason to buckle down and figure it out. When you are bored, it is not time to turn on Netflix, not if you want to be a master. It is time to find a new challenge. That's where your pleasure is going to come from. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, here's the bonuses. Here's the things people do not talk about. Mechanical knowledge. I've already talked about that. I will continue to talk about it till I'm blue in the face. Working with your hands. I don't want you to read music to become a master. I want you to do it. Okay, so that deep work, as hands-on as possible. If you need to memorize lines, write them down. Get that mechanical advantage, right? And 2, sleep. I'm a freak about sleep. I'm Anybody I ever work with, they come into RD, whatever, at some point we're going to talk about sleep. The actual tacit knowledge and deep work and unconscious competence is actually further developed if you sleep appropriately while you are sleeping. So you can actually accelerate the cycle of accelerated returns by protecting your sleep. And I'll get way into sleep in later. I mean, it's just something that I'm going to talk about a lot. But practicing at the expense of sleep, physical practice, is probably not as efficient as cutting practice short and sleeping on it. Okay. There are things that, like playing the piano, learning how to type, where people get hung up in the same spot every time when they're learning. And then after they've gotten sufficient sleep, their brain has actually worked through the sticking point and they have mastered it, not by practicing, but by practicing and sleeping. So that's a big bonus nobody talks about, is do it and sleep on it. More important than your 10,000 hours, because that's a lot of years, is follow the brain's natural way of learning, sleep enough, and do as much as possible physically. And we'll shortcut that massively. Hopefully that makes sense. Getting this cycle of accelerated returns by practicing. Practice is going to be the part of the process that you can expedite that other people may not. Right? The observation is the observation. The actual practice, if done right, can be expedited without more hours of actual time spent practicing. So that's efficiency, right? You want to master a bunch of things, you want to learn, you want to be a top 1%er in more than one area, you're going to have to be efficient. Hope you guys realize you just got hit with some really powerful and pragmatic stuff. Don't you think? I do. And if you agree, hit the thumbs up button below and like the video. Let me know in the comments what other videos you want to see, what you want me to expand upon, and what questions you have. And remember, all of this stuff is only as powerful as the actions you take in your execution, the practical applications you can derive from it. So let's see how quickly and effectively and efficiently you can master the things to come. You're going to get information here that's going to help you on your journey that you will not find anywhere else. So be sure to subscribe. You don't want to miss one of these videos.